Hello and welcome to Henry Weston's Old Mate, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Walton. Joining me again today is Stuart Butler. Hi, Stu.
Hey, Phil. It's good to be back.
It is. So before we make a real start, it's been a few days since we caught up last. How are you?
I'm really good, mate. I haven't had a drink.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Actually, we should make a regular check-in just to make sure of that every time.
Yeah, I haven't had a drink and I haven't been inclined to have a drink, so that's positive.
That is really good, really good. Okay, so like I say, it's been a few days since we recorded. I don't know about you. I've had a bit of feedback. Just people liking what they're hearing. Surprised that I've taken. I think there were a few questions around Phil doing a podcast about alcoholism, and then a few questions about is this something that you need to tell us? This is like you'll have to listen to the show. But also those people that have listened to it, we've had some good feedback. They like what they're hearing, and which is encouraging.
Yeah, I've had a couple of messages, like we just discussed as well. A few people saying they're going to catch up with it, on the journey to work or when the boss isn't around at work, whenever they do their podcasting. But yeah, for a podcast that, had plenty of content, but, probably kept a few people hanging, we didn't go into great detail. So hopefully if that sort of piqued the interest, there is plenty more good stuff to come.
Absolutely. And any reflections, I guess, then from the episode? Anything that was left unsaid that you wanted to, having listened back to it, anything that you wanted to pick up on or kind of expand upon? Or are you? I know we've got plenty of episodes where we are going to expand on stuff, but just checking in before we move on.
Yeah, no, I think we covered. We probably didn't cover everything we had on our tick sheet, did we? But like we said when we finished recording, that 40 minutes that we were chatting felt like 10 minutes to me. And as long as we are not repeating ourselves and going over old ground, if we've got 40 minutes of new stuff each week, it will just run its course, hopefully, and potentially, if we need to run over another episode or run an episode into two, then that's it. But no, I did. I listened back, and I don't think we left any grey areas really. I think we finished off each sort of point that we started, which I guess is the key to it. Maybe we're learning what we're doing.
Learning as we go on. Okay, so for those that perhaps didn't listen to episode 1 and have dipped in straight into episode 2, very quick recap on what we talked about in episode 1, which was kind of Stuart's experience with alcoholism. So he talked a little bit about the binge drinking days, the type of alcohol that he used, going from kind of Henry Weston, which hence the name of the podcast, through to kind of rosé wine, which was kind of a midweek drink, and then onto the hard stuff, the spirits on the weekend. And then we touched on some behaviors, and we touched a little bit around kind of the amount or the volume of alcohol that was being drunk. So that gives a bit of a flavor of where we're going to go. And today is the first of our kind of deeper explorations into your experience. And we're going to go into kind of the road to alcoholism. So we're going to cast our minds back to kind of the really early drinking days, kind of, under 18s. Not that anybody did that, but we might have to admit that did happen. And your early 20s, and then we'll talk about, you went to university. You also spent quite a bit of time abroad doing various jobs. So we'll pick up about that. And then, you returned home, obviously. And then, life-changing events like getting married and having kids are, on the discussion point. So it's an ambitious set list for today, but we'll see how much we can cover. And so let's go straight into it then. One of my abiding memories when we were growing up, so 16, 17, 18, was the booze cruise. So we live in Deal. Well, we lived in Deal. I lived in Deal. And which is, for those people that don't know where that is, it's about 6 or 8 miles from Dover. So we would pile into a car, drive to Dover, walk on as a foot passenger, because that's the cheapest ticket.
Yeah.
Get as much alcohol as you could possibly carry, and then throw it back in the car, and then go and drink it that night.
Yeah.
Which I guess as a young adult or older teenager is probably how most people start experimenting with alcohol. It's a bit bingy.
Yeah.
But I think reflecting on what you talked about in the first episode, it kind of there's a running theme with the binge drinking and the alcohol. So do you remember much about those days?
I remember much about the day. I remember a couple of the cruises themselves. Yeah, we'd either go on as foot passengers with our, I don't know, are you allowed to say your granny wagon or your granny thing that they used to pull around the supermarket? Yeah, you could with the bungee cords, you could get 6 to 8 crates on one of them. But then I think we ended up, you'd find someone who worked for P&O could get you a ticket, so you could actually just drive the car on for about £8 rather than spending £1. So we ended up doing that. But yeah, I remember, in line with this podcast, I remember, we'd go into the duty free and my eyes would instantly go to Stella Artois, Kronenberg. I had no interest in the lower drinks. And my memory from that was Vladimir vodka, but they used to sell 2 varieties. They used to sell a standard variety, 37% in a blue bottle, and they sold Vladimir Gold in a black bottle that was over 40%. So that's what I used to go for. I'd go for strong lager and the Vladimir vodka. And like you say, we'd get back and consume it. But yeah, I mean, I remember Cookie's older brother, Andrew, he liked to party, but, he'd sort of say to me, what? The Vladimir Black's just going to get you belted. You won't know what you're doing. And I'm going, perfect. Why doesn't everyone else think like me? What's wrong? There's nothing wrong. I didn't understand that concept that alcohol could be too strong, or I didn't want to understand it.
Yeah, so, and there's and then like you say, the idea was you get back. Often, I'd love it if Alan Cookson's parents are listening to this, but often we'd get back to Cookie's house. His parents had gone away to, I think it was a New Forest. They had a caravan or something.
Sandy balls.
Okay. But they were away for the weekend, and that house got abused, didn't it? And there were so many parties, and we all got absolutely smashed to pieces too often. But we were reminiscing when we saw each other in the summer, and then we kind of touched on it again after we finished recording. There's a great funny story involving a visit from the police after one of the booze cruises. Do you want to? I love the story and just wonder what would happen in this day and age, but you tell it really well. So go on.
Well, yeah, we won't hold people up too long, but Andrew, the eldest Cookson, was obviously the first to drive. He had the driving license, and I think myself possibly. I took my car because I used to borrow my mum's little white 106. So we'd been to France. We'd taken the cars, and as you come off the ferry, you head straight up Jubilee Way to get back to Deal. And I was ragging the arse off the little 105 or 106, whatever it was. Andrew was ragging the arse out of that black Fiesta. And I just remember Andrew, or the car pulling up next to us and the rear window winding down and a cap gun appearing out the back. And, a few blank rounds fired in our direction. Ha, 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 very funny, all good. Obviously, we thought nothing more of it until 2 police officers, burly police officers, knocked on the door of Club Cookson's about 4 hours later, asking. I don't remember if they asked if there were any loaded firearms in the house, but they didn't see the funny side of it. But like we said, I mean, I'd hate to think how. So obviously, a member of the public reported the incident.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you just imagine? There wouldn't be a polite knock on the door to see if there are any loaded firearms. There would be a foot through the door and questions asked later.
Yeah.
Okay, so we digress, but that is a funny story. It always makes me chuckle when we think about it.
Yeah, one I forgot about.
Yeah. The other thing that we got to talking about as well was around your attitude to other people not being as drunk as you.
Yeah, I used to encourage people to drink because I encouraged myself in my head. Like we sort of said the other day, I wasn't always the drunkest, and I wasn't always the quickest, but I was going as quick as I could. And if I felt somebody else wasn't putting the effort in, it's a funny way, but if I thought someone was taking it easy or wasn't, because it was all, for me it was, we've got to get drunk, so there's none of this, well, I'll have a pint of lager, then I'll have 10 minutes off, or I'll have half a glass of water because that's what people tell you to do. No, and I did used to get the if there was shots going around, if there was, if I was having a shot of vodka, you were having one, and if you weren't having one, I wanted to know why, and if you told me why, I didn't like it, and I remember I was not nasty, but I wasn't. Well, maybe some people would have thought I was. I wasn't very polite, and I would have done everything I could to make sure someone else was having a shot of vodka. If there was 6 of us around the table, 6 of us were having a vodka, and that was it. Yeah. And it was very strange. I don't know why I felt responsible for the other people's drinking needs, alcohol consumption, but I did. I really did. And it did used to give me the right if people pushed back against it.
Yeah, no, I remember that as well. I think you were relentless with the ribbing of kind of something going on like, why aren't you drinking, Phil, keep up, blah blah blah. And I do remember perhaps even 1 or 2 occasions where it got to the point it's like, well, I'm not sticking around with you bunch of XYZs. And off you went. Like, oh.
Well, I've made a note because obviously you posed a question, didn't you, on our start sheet with regards to drinking and why.
So we had a listener's question.
Yeah.
So we first the mailbag arrived and we got to open the letter, and somebody had listened to the first episode and kind of said, okay, why every time you had a drink did you have to be battered by the time you finished? What is it about not finishing when you're merry or just having 3 or 4? Why was it? Do you understand in yourself why that was, that you have to be battered?
Well, when I read the question, I thought, I don't know, what a good question. And I thought about it for 2 or 3 minutes, and actually it came to me very quickly. And I've got some notes written in front of me. I won't read it word for word, but the key points I've written was I enjoyed the buzz. I don't know what drunk feels to anyone else. I'm me. In my head and my body, being to the point, being drunk or being intoxicated and drunk was a fantastic feeling for me. I just loved it. I liked not the lack of control, but the slight easing off of control. You do feel more relaxed to a point. And you think you could get away with a bit more, possibly. But one point that I wrote, which a lot of people might not agree, but I was pretty good at drinking. And when you're good at something, you get praise or you get attention. I could, from a very young age, someone could line up 5 shots of tequila and say, oh, no one's going to drink them. And I could drink it and not go and be sick. I hated it, but, you sat around at the bar after that, be it in the King's Headed Deal, the bar in Val d'Isère, when I'm getting to know people in Holland or the Czech Republic when I've moved out there, drinking exploits in a group of mainly male-dominated social environment, the lads love to see the idiot who can keep the booze down. And again, it's a bit like the circus clown in a way. Once I'd done that, people would get extra value out of me because they could coerce me to go and do silly things, if it might be chat to woman that maybe didn't want chatting to, but it's funny if we send Stu over there. Or one of my worst points was if someone needed a bit of stick given to them, you know.
Yeah.
My sense of humour was fairly good, can be wicked, could be a bit too wicked on the booze, and you know, that would enhance that. But yeah, that's that's the main things I've got there written down. And yeah, like I say, I think a lot of it, and I think a lot of that is subconscious, because I certainly wasn't. I never, because I'm a stubborn sod, you'll know that. I never went out of my way to. I didn't drink to fit in, because I was quite happy on my own. You know, if someone didn't want to have a drink with me, bollocks to them. I'll drink my 7 pints of Stella on my own. But if it helped me fit in without me feeling like I had to go out of my way, then it was a win-win.
Yeah.
So that's the answer to that as best I can.
Okay, no, it's good. It's I think the combination of essentially the buzz, that's your drug of choice.
Yeah.
The buzz, but also it comes with a whole load of kind of almost social kudos in some ways.
Definitely.
That kind of you enjoyed as well.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to move the timeline on a little bit. So I left Deal in '98, went off to university. You went to university a little bit later than I did. When did you go off?
2008. I went to Wolverhampton University, but actually studied on the Walsall campus. So, just outside Wolverhampton.
Okay. So for podcast listeners, I'm going to do air quotes, but you were there as a mature student.
I was the mature one. I wasn't the oldest one on the course. Actually, I don't even think I was in the top 5 oldest ones on the course. But I was a mature student for financial aid reasons. Certainly, I got looked after better by the government.
Oh, okay, very nice.
Yeah.
So the university experience, then, they're presumably 3 years.
Yeah.
And for people just leaving home as young adults, that's normally kind of the step into kind of, Freshers Week is always carnage and all of that sort of stuff. But as perhaps attending university 10 years after what would traditionally be the kind of the usual route in, you're drinking. What happened with your drinking when you got to university?
Well, I'd been back from the Czech Republic for about 6 months. I didn't really. I decided, that greenkeeping wasn't for me, or I couldn't find anything in greenkeeping. And I had a younger brother who just finished his first year at Wolverhampton. So yeah, I got there and I stayed in halls of residence first year, brand new halls of residence, but my drinking just carried on like it had for my time in the Czech Republic that we will discuss later. But I settled in. Freshers Week wasn't anything for me really, because the first 2 nights were piling onto a bus and going to a nightclub. So I did the first night. I got drunk, but I soon sought out the different drinking circles, the non-nightclub drinking circles. The football team, my brother was well in with the football team. That suited me, sports, men, like-minded, conversation, and like-minded drinking. As a lot of you'll know, Phil, the aim of drinking at university really is to get fairly drunk, and there is a lot of pre-drinking, so that fitted my drinking style, if you will, very easily. And I just after first year, when I moved into a house just around the corner from campus, I just basically fitted in a routine of social house drinking, probably 5 or 6 nights a week, and it wasn't getting drunk every night, but there was always the option to get drunk. Pub life was non-existent really, because of location where we lived. There wasn't any suitable pub, but we just used to get, and I'd drink with the guys from 6 till 11, and they'd all head off in the taxis to the nightclubs for the student nights, and I'd generally probably have 3 or 4 more drinks at home and then go to bed, because although I I was always able to get up for the lectures. I mean, I'd been in the working world, so I was used to sort of getting up and doing things with a hangover. So I could, believe it or not, the 10 o'clock lecture that was absolutely unavailable for many, I could do the studying and the drinking quite well. So that's how uni sort of went.
Okay, and did your drinking habits change at all? Like, presumably you came home during kind of summer break, Christmas time. Did that change, or actually were you coming back to a place where you had people here that would facilitate kind of your opportunities to drink because you were catching up with people?
Yeah, well, I didn't come home all that much. I had a little job, so I used to come home about Christmas Eve. I worked in the kitchen at the football ground, so I'd sort of finish a shift on the 23rd or 24th. But when I did come home, it was back to the pub with North, who was normally around, my brothers, if they were around. It was back to the King's Head, the first night and every night for the 2 weeks I was home. So I'd slip straight back into that routine. And I'd go back to mum and dad's. The pre-drinking, it's funny because it wasn't, I'd do pre-drinking at uni with vodka, sambuca, whatever, cheap spirits. But I'd go home and I wouldn't do that, but I would substitute that for cans of cider. But I'd get them as strong as I could, because although mum probably would have taken an interest in what I was drinking, because mothers do. They don't want you to get absolutely rat-ass, but mum wouldn't investigate a can of cider in the fridge. So I think we're probably already going in a direction of I was managing my consumption to suit my surroundings, which is something that we'll get into later, I'm sure. But it was obvious from very early on.
Yeah, and perhaps not obvious at the time, but now you've had a chance to kind of look back on it. It's kind of, hiding your alcohol in plain sight, but just on a different coloured can.
I'd have put it would have been K cider or something back then. I'd have bought 4 cans of 8.5% cider, because mum wouldn't have seen the 8.5%. If I'd have gone home and put a bottle of vodka on the side, drunk half of that before I went out, I'd have got away with it once, and then I wouldn't have got a telling off, but it just wouldn't have been acceptable. Mum would say that that's not going to carry on.
Uncomfortable questions, yeah. And you said that there was a period of time during your university days that you'd make the decision in your head and follow it through, that you're going to take a break from drinking.
Yeah. Yes.
So what was the psychology, the attitude around deciding to take a break? Where did that come from?
Well, I think, again, and it's something that I've noted down, it jogged my memory. I think there was probably, with the stress of year 2, and I know in particular year 3, when I was starting to write my dissertation, there was a certain amount of anxiety, because I realised that although I had attended a lot of lectures, I hadn't put as much effort in as I needed to. And I really needed to pull my finger out. And being slightly more worldly wise, I knew that to achieve something from the 3 years, I needed to pull my finger out. So I would stop drinking. Funnily enough, I would tell porky pies to all my mates. I remember once I actually told my good drinking buddies that I'd been to the doctors, and he told me I needed to stop drinking. Well, they probably only know this now. I don't think I've told him. I hadn't been to the doctors. But for Stu, because my nickname at university was Fun. I was Fun Time Butler, because there was another butler who wasn't quite so fun, younger brother. So I was Fun Time Butler, and I used to play up to that a bit. And for Fun Time to stop drinking for 2 weeks, I'd get hammered on Facebook. I'd get hammered in the library. People, it was news. In a silly way, in a small campus, when I stopped drinking, people wanted to know why, and they wanted to rib me for it. So it was, I think I wasn't aware that I was probably struggling with anxiety in those periods, but I was aware enough to know that if I wanted to actually come out of it with a degree, I needed to stop drinking. But the way I went about that was I created a whole, it used to come with a whole story as to why I was stopping. So yeah, funny, interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think having that self-awareness was helpful as a means to an end to get your degree.
Sorry. There you go. Yeah, go on, mate.
All right, we can cut that bit out. So making a note. Okay. So yeah, having that self-awareness, I guess, to put your drinking on hold so that you can actually get something out of your university days is kind of quite helpful. But then beyond that, the return to drinking was spectacular.
Always. Yeah, always. And I think, although I say I stopped drinking for a week or 2 weeks at a time, I probably didn't. I was probably drinking a little bit secretly. But yeah, any time I abstained from alcohol, I would go back to it as hard, if not harder, always.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the theme that will run through this podcast series.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned about the Czech Republic. I'm going to kind of lump it in together, and we spent quite a bit of time talking about the Netherlands on the last call. So we'll focus maybe on the Czech Republic and then your time in Val d'Isère. Let's take kind of the foreign excursions as a group and bring them together. So you go out there, presumably, and I always see this quite brave because I'm not that way inclined, but presumably you've gone out there under your own steam, not as a group of mates. You've just gone out there, decided you're going to go and
yeah. Let's read my blog. The last 2 blogs I've written are about my time in Czech, so we'll tag them all. But yeah, I went out there. We won't go through the blog I've just written. I lost a job in Essex. Couldn't find a job in the UK. Applied for a job. Ended up in the Czech Republic. Ended up living with a Scottish guy who was my boss and 2 other English guys who were work colleagues. I was number 2 it was a 4-man team plus 4 locals. I was deputy head greenkeeper. But the Czech Republic, they like their booze, and I liked my booze. And working away, it was my first experience of working away from home, but just living in an all-male environment. And it was very acceptable, and it was almost the thing to do was to drink together as much as you could, which again suited me down to the ground. It was weekends mainly in the first few months, and then my Scottish boss Mick actually didn't come back after Christmas. He had a bit of a minor disagreement with our management. Then we got a new guy, another Stuart. Stu was a good drinker, liked to drink, loved a pre-drink, loved drinking at home. And under him, it went a bit downhill really, because he would almost encourage us to not worry about getting up the next day. So we used to go at it hard. And the Czechs, you've got absinthe, you've got Slivovitz, which is a local sort of plum brandy homebrewed stuff. But we used to go, I remember in the Czech, we used to go out and you're drinking heavy, strong lager, good lager. But you used to be able to get a thing called a Maxi Pez fig. And it was, a lot of the bars would have a pot of figs just basically sitting in alcohol, and they'd serve you a shot, and they'd put this fig that was loaded with alcohol, they'd put a cocktail stick through it, and they'd balance it across the shot, and you'd drink the shot, have the fig, and I could drink them till the cows come home. No one else could again. So that was it. I'd get the figs in, but I could. Yeah, the Czech Republic, the year or so I was there, again, I had and this will go back to the university talk. I ended up breaking up with a girl I'd been seeing for about 5 years when I was there. That hit me pretty hard. And I remember after that sort of happened around Christmas. So I had that experience, and we had a change of manager who encouraged the drinking even more, because Mick, although he liked to drink, he was still very much about doing a day's work. And I'd have at any given time, I'd have 6 bottles of wine in the fridge. I'd have 4 crates of beer by the fridge. I'd have, absinthe in the freezer because it wouldn't freeze. And it was just chaos, to be honest, mate. Absolute chaos. The last 4 months there was full-time drinking. And if you could fit a bit of work in, that was a bonus.
Yeah. And it sounds like, from what you described with the fig kind of fig cocktail, we'll use that for now, that if other people are struggling to maintain it or kind of do any more than 1 or 2 of those, and you're absolutely fine with it, it sounds like there's like a flag in the air kind of saying, your tolerance of alcohol is just a step ahead of the people that you're around. If you're getting drunk, or it's taking longer for you to get drunk, then your tolerance is certainly it.
It's funny because I don't know if my tolerance was ever better, but again, because I was a stubborn sod, I could hold on to it just long enough. I remember Richard, who was our mechanic who lived out there. We'd get out in town and he said, "Stu, if you start buying the figs, I'm going home." And I'd do it every time, buy the figs. Richard had slammed 50 kroner down on the bar. That's it. I'm going home, and I used to love it. I buy a fig every time. But yeah, I could handle it. I was always a mess. A lot of the time, I was second one in bed once some person had gone, or I just wouldn't. My usual trick was I would drink, and everyone else had the nightclub in their head, and I had no interest. So my time frame was, say we went out at 7. My time frame in my head was get to 11. Everyone else is almost pacing themselves till 2:30, 3. And I was just, if I could get to 11, that's all I'm interested in. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. And was the experience, the approach the same when you got to Val d'Isère, when you did a couple of ski seasons?
It was for a few months because I went with 2 guys, a good friend of mine and a good friend of James's, Theo. So me, Theo and James, we shared a little apartment. So for the first 6 weeks before I met my now wife, me and James predominantly just, the best way to describe that is living like students in a ski resort, because that was, although we'd both gone out there with a bit of money in the bank and we didn't need to work, you're talking 7 or 8 euros a pint. And although we had money in the bank, we couldn't afford, that wasn't sustainable for the 5 months we were going to be there. So pre-drinking, again, it was there. We'd go down the mountain. James had his car there, and we'd buy you could get, in Carrefour, I think you could get 2 litres of vodka for 14 euros. So we'd get that in. And I remember sometimes me and James would be doing, I shouldn't say James, or, we'd be doing over a litre of vodka between the 2 of us before we went to the pub. So we'd then head out and walk to the pub in -10-degree snowstorms.
Yeah.
And then some nights you'd end up at the pub and you'd have two pints and you'd blasted because you've had, you've got half a litre of vodka, a few French lagers. But yeah, that was student living. It changed a little bit because I met my wife in the January. Spent a lot of time. She lived on her own, so I spent a lot of time at her flat then. But again, she worked, so my drinking would be on the mountain with James during the day, and then in the pub in the evening with James and my now wife, and our social groups. But me and James would always have a load of beer in our belly because we'd stopped, if we had been skiing, which for James was a lot rarer than me. But there was always alcohol involved, not from the start of the day, but you'd finish off with some beer.
So I'm interested, when you meet Mrs. Butler, did your alcohol consumption change at all? Are you aware that you're hitting it pretty hard? You meet a new person that you really like. is there a kind of, let's tone this down a little bit, or is it just, she met me when I was pissed, so that's it?
Our social life in the ski resorts or in Val d'Isere was the pub. Right. And generally, no, my drinking habits didn't change. I stopped drinking vodka. No, not vodka. I stopped drinking absinthe, although we didn't drink much of it. But there was a little spell where they had an old bottle in our favourite bar. And funnily, I tried to have a wee in the fridge of her apartment very early on in our relationship. So I stopped drinking absinthe.
That'll endear you, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. If you imagine the apartment was no bigger than a garden shed, so finding the toilet shouldn't have been a problem. But apart from that, no, I would. I famously, her parents, my wife's parents, came out to see her, and we met them, me, James, and a guest we had staying with us at our place. Went to meet them, and all three of us turned up belted. Funny belted, but belted nonetheless. There's a couple of pictures on Facebook of us sitting there. I mean, we didn't ruin the night, but I should, it would have been better behaviour to not turn up absolutely plastered, which we did.
Right. Okay. So, in terms of kind of timeline of where we're up to, at what point did you stop your foreign excursions and come back and stay back? What year was that?
2014. So we finished.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've had so when I say, so me and you were drinking from about 2016, 17. So you've had a good
20 years.
Good 20 years, 18 years of developing, a tolerance for alcohol, a habit for it, a liking for the buzz, and then you come home and you settle down with Mrs. B, and you have a young family now.
Yes, 2006.
So how did the introduction of significant responsibility sit with you and your drink?
It went to shit. That's when it completely went to shit. Our child was probably a month old, and I remember a specific time when I can't remember if I'd been secretly drinking before, but my wife took our newborn daughter to Tesco's for the first time. It might have even been in the 2 weeks of maternity leave, because I was at home paternity leave. And I drank half a bottle of vodka because I wanted to go to sleep, because, not looking for sympathy, but, having your first child, we weren't sleeping very much. And I was feeling, and I just wanted to go to sleep. So I drank half a bottle of vodka, went to sleep for about an hour. They came home from the supermarket 45 minutes later, and I got up and had to try and hide being a drunk mess. And I think probably not from that day, but from that sort of time when my daughter was born, I could safely say I was an alcoholic.
So what was different? If that entered your head and you're cognizant of being an alcoholic, obviously the introduction of a newborn is obviously something that's changed. But what is it in you that's kind of, how come you've all of a sudden recognised it?
Recognise what? Looking back, how come I recognised that I was an alcoholic?
So, did you recognise at the time that you were an alcoholic?
No.
No. Okay.
Well, I tell you what happened from that time on was the secret drinking. Hiding my alcohol consumption roughly started there. Not all my alcohol consumption, but I always had vodka stashed around the homestead, if you like, because it always wasn't in the house. Sometimes it was in the garden.
Okay. So was that a mechanism that you'd put in place to avoid potential conflict with Mrs. B, because you've got a new responsibility, you need to keep your shit together, you can't be drunk all the time, so you started doing stuff?
Yeah, I think, and I'm pretty sure, it was a lot of it was down to sleep, because we will discuss it going forward, but I've always been an awful sleeper, and I used to use vodka to help me sleep. It had a double benefit because I loved being pissed, so it helped me get to sleep, and it got me drunk quicker than drinking 2-3 bottles of strong cider. So that was, but then as we know, as you understand within your sort of profession, if I'm spending my majority of my time drinking vodka, I can't at the weekends just drink cider to attain the state of mind that I want to get. It just doesn't work. My body I can't drink 16 cans of cider to get as drunk as I can on half a bottle of vodka, which is probably where I was. I'd need to consume 10 cans of cider to do what half a bottle of vodka was, and I couldn't drink 10 cans of cider because my wife would have said, "You're drinking too much cider." So my way round it was to secretly consume large amounts of vodka each time I went to pour. So probably over the course of a Saturday night, if we were watching a movie, my wife would see me drink 4 to 5 cans of cider, but I would be also consuming half to 3/4 a bottle of vodka over the same time frame.
Okay. This isn't on the question and answers that we've kind of prepared, but it has come to me, and it just astounds me, or no, it intrigues me. The affordability of being an alcoholic.
Cheap. I tell anyone, it was cheap.
Right.
I think it didn't impact me. I didn't buy anything else. Let's use a very simple. I earn roughly £400 a week after the tax man's had his go. I would put £250 of that into our joint account to cover bills, mortgages. I would put £100 elsewhere, and I would spend £50 on vodka a week out of my bank. I would then use the joint bank account to buy cider for the weekend, and I'd buy 8 to 10 cans. So that would give me a stockpile. And if I did the big shop, which I did, it was a deception. I would do the big shop. I would spend £100, and I could lose another £10 on an extra bottle of vodka and another £5 on an extra bottle of wine. So I'd always have that wine hidden. So my vodka expense for me was £50 a week roughly, and it would cost the joint account probably a further £20.
Right.
So it's not in the grand scheme of things, because my wife would never ask me, my money, that as long as the mortgage was paid and all the bills were paid, and the joint account would be going up. So my wife had no need to, and my bank account didn't go down. In a funny way, my bank account stayed level and my savings account went up. So I always said being an alcoholic didn't cost me anything. I didn't go into debt. I didn't lose money. I didn't make money. I'm not going to sit here and say
yeah. Okay, that has surprised me. I'm going to say it just, and I guess if you're, so I'm going to make an assumption. If you're drinking to get drunk rather than to enjoy it, you're not necessarily spending, like, it's gone really trendy these days to have craft lagers and beers and that sort of stuff. A case will cost you 35 quid, but if you're not interested in, you're judging the quality of the alcohol on the output rather than the taste.
Well, yeah, and it's a great, and again, and it's a good point that I'll probably make here. I didn't spend my time researching the horses. I didn't spend my time researching greenkeeping. I spent my time researching special offers on alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would go. I would pick my supermarkets. If I could save 3 or 4 quid on a bottle of vodka, I'd drive the extra mile. I'd go out of my way, and I'd buy 2, and dash one.
Dash one. Okay. Okay. Well, this seems like a good place to call it quits for this evening. I think we've covered an awful lot there, and I think what we're starting to see, or starting to really understand when we paired this episode with the last episode, is just for quite how long you were drinking for. So in the region of 20 years, the habits that you were forming and the frequency and volume that you were getting. So most nights a week, and rather a lot of the heavy stuff that you were getting through. And then we're kind of, the point that we're going to pause it for this evening is we've now touched upon starting to hide your alcohol. So big life-changing event has come in, and it's kind of turned your responsibilities upside down. And one of the things that you need to do as a coping mechanism so your drinking can continue is hiding your alcohol. And I think this should segue hopefully very nicely into probably our next episode, where we're going to talk about behaviors and the lies and the deceit. And, you know, it will go as far as you're comfortable with. But again, one of those questions that intrigues me, which don't answer it now, is how do you maintain a relationship along those lines? So you will put the limit on how much you're willing to answer on that, because it's obviously personal.
We'll be able to answer most of it, mate. Pretty much.
Okay. So that's where we're going next, and that'll be recorded in the next couple of days. But for now, kind of thank you, Stuart, again for just it's so interesting, so really, really good. Thank you to listeners for listening to Henry Weston's Old Mate, the podcast. So do feel free to reach out to us on Twitter or at StuButts or HWOM@gmail.com. Stuart held up his end of the bargain from episode 1 and Gmail account, so we've got that. If you've got questions or you want to comment, be polite, but and if you want to challenge us, then you can, but yeah, be nice. But until the next time, stay safe and we'll see you soon. Cheers, Stu.
Cheers, mate. Thanks, Phil.